So, Staff Superintendent, why don't you just start out by introducing yourself?
So my name is Mark Barkley. I'm currently the Staff Superintendent in charge of Westfield Command. That means I oversee the operations of 11 and 12, 14, 22, 23, 31, 51, and 52 divisions for the Toronto Police Service. And I've been a member of the Toronto Police Service since September 24th, 1985.
Okay, so something I find really interesting about you that I wasn't expecting going into this whole TPS Trust project is that so many of the people I've spoken to did not know that they were going to be a police officer until suddenly they were. They didn't dream of it. But when I was speaking with you, you knew from a very young age that you wanted to be a police officer. So just bring me back to your childhood, if you can, Mark. Just tell me about where you grew up, what life was like for you, and why you knew you wanted to be a police officer.
So I lived next door to 41 Division from the time I was 6 years old and grew up next to that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I always wanted to be a police officer ever since I was a very young boy. My father was a police officer, but my parents had separated when I was 2 years old and had very little contact for most of my my life. That's a whole other side, but I can relate to the people that have grown up through that environment. My mom raised me, and I lived in a housing complex at Parma Court, and then moved to 1021 Birchmount Road in 1973 in the spring, and was in awe of the police officers next door and this constant ability to stand there at the fence to see them. They would come over and talk to me. So it strengthened my desire that entire trip that I was going to be a police officer. No matter what came along, no matter what conversation, no matter what teachers asked me, it was without fail, I was going to be a police officer.
So tell me about those conversations. Like, just describe the scene for us there. How were you able to talk to these police officers through this fence?
So at that 1021 Birchmount Road, in those days, the 41 Division had a number of features. The north side of the building was actually the police station itself. And that's where the police officers worked out. And that shared a common fence line with the south side of 1021 Birchmount. Was a chain link fence. The other side of the building on the south side that faced Eglinton was the courthouse. And of course, they had a small stable there for the horses that were housed at 41 Division in those years. I would stand on my side of the chain link fence because I would play on the grass and play in the parking lot there as a little boy. And I'd stand at shift change. I'd see the officers come out and they'd have their cars parked along the way, and they would come out and they would talk to me. I would say, "Hi, how are you?" And they said, "Well, you know, how you doing, little guy?" And this short, chubby little kid with curly hair, which I have no hair anymore, but it was with curly hair. And they'd say, "What are you going to do? You are working hard in school?" I said, "Yes, I'm going to be a policeman one day." And it was always what I would say. "I'm going to be a policeman one day." And they'd say, "Okay, stay in school, listen to your mom, work hard, be a good boy. You can be a policeman one day." So every year, right as rain, no matter what, that's what I would say. And then I'd go to the police week, and I'd go over to get the tours of the police station. And I would be there a couple of times a day. They would look and go, "You again?" "Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm back. Hi." And it was so exciting. I got to see the bullpen and the interview room. Oh my goodness, go to the two-way glass like in a Hollywood movie. And my friends, we'd take turns. One would go in the lineup and one would stand there and make faces at each other to see if we could see each other. And then they had a range. And oh my goodness, to go on the range, and they would sometimes at the very back of the range, there'd be where they sweep up, there'd be the little brass shell casings. Well, that was just, if I could find one of those and put that in my pocket, that was just the cat's meow. I thought I had found heaven on earth.
How old were you? How old were you during this time, would you say?
Probably 6 through about 13 years old. Very, very formative years. To have that relationship, to see it next door. And of course, growing up in the housing complex that 1021 Road was Ontario Housing of the day. Now they refer to it as Toronto Community Housing. And we had community guardians who were really good. They wore green blazers and beige pants and whatnot. They were always pretty good guys and ladies that would say, "Hey, be good, we'll follow the rules and stuff." But the police would be in the building from time to time. And if I happened to encounter one of them, I'd remind them yet again that I'm going to be a policeman one day. And if they were familiar with me, they would just nod their head and it's him again. So
Oh, I absolutely love that. Just little Mark Barkley. Did you ever find any shell casings? Do you remember?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, and I put them away in my pocket, and I had them for years and years and years. And eventually, as you get older, and join the police service, whatnot, I look at these, little containers I had with a couple little casings, and I thought, you know what, kept them, but I just throw them away. It was 2 or 3 of them over the years, and of course, going to the barn was the biggest treat. Going and see the horses. Memory serves me, they had 2 horses named after the Flintstone characters, which was so cool. They had Fred and Barney, and that was just the best. And the year that the barn caught on fire, I was about 11 or 12. Oh my goodness, from my balcony, we could see the smoke. And we all ran down, we're all standing at the fence, and the officers had the horses out. It was very minor. Some hay had caught fire, I think, on the loft. But to the kids, this was a major thing. Are the horses okay? And we could see the officers walking the horses around the parking lot. It was just amazing experience to just see them and interact with them.
Do you remember what your impression was? Like, you knew you wanted to be a police officer, but in your mind, like, what did police officers do back then? Why did you want to be a police officer?
To help people. That's what I was raised to believe, is police officers help people. That's what my mom reinforced to me. You were always respectful and polite to the police officer. We're talking a long time ago. So would police officers speak to you, say, yes, sir. Today it's yes, officer, whatever. It was so many more women have joined the service, and we've changed amazingly. But back then it was predominantly men that you would see as police officers. We're talking 47, 49 years ago. But you would say yes, sir, and of course today would be yes sir, no ma'am. Be polite, be respectful to the police. They're here to help you. If you're ever in trouble, go see a police officer. That's what their function is. They're here to help you, and be respectful. And if you get in trouble, the police have to bring you home. You'll get worse from when they leave. The days of the wooden spoon.
Tell me more about your mom and growing up with her there.
My mom was a little lady from the East Coast, born and raised in Bathurst, New Brunswick, came to Toronto in the 1950s, worked as a store security for Simpsons down at the Yonge and Queen, and then the Oshawa Group, the Tower store at Riverdale Mall. And used to go down there and to see her, and she'd be arresting shoplifters and whatnot. She'd go to court sometimes at the 41 division, the south side of the courthouse, before the new Scarborough court opened up. But she was a pretty good disciplinarian, and always told me about, we may be poor, but you don't have to be dirty. You don't have to follow a certain crowd. You're only limited by yourself and what you're willing to push yourself to do, how hard you're willing to work. The greatest obstacle you have is how you're going to get yourself from where you are to where you wish to be. What are you prepared to do? How hard are you prepared to work? And she always pushed that. Stay in school, work hard, avoid the trouble. You know who the trouble are. Stay away from them. I catch you with them, I'm going to find out.
So you grew up in you grew up in this housing complex, and you've said that you were poor. So just tell me about growing up there in that building, and what was your environment like? And you just said your mom's comments about avoid the trouble, you know who they are. What do you remember about growing up there? And your mom, because you shared a story with me in our conversation a couple of weeks ago about your mom cleaning the hallway. I'd love for you to share that also.
Absolutely. So building on that theme of, we may be poor, but you don't have to be dirty. My mom would go out in the hallway, and we had caretaking staff, but she took great pride in having a clean place. I was always clean. She'd go out in the hallways and vacuum the hallways on the 6th floor where we lived. She'd take the old pine sol. Every time I tell the story, I can smell the pine sol. And she'd be out in the hallway wiping down the walls with the pine sol, cleaning everything, because she took great pride. And we had a lot of seniors that lived in the building in those days. And mom would say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Duffield, they got a little dog, and his knees are bad, or she's had a heart attack, can you walk their dog for them? So I would go off and no problem, I go do that. Or Mrs. such and such down the way, she's having difficulties this week, and could you take her garbage out? And I knock on the door and go in and take their garbage out. And mom was worked with the seniors committee and volunteering to help with them. And she was just a young lady at the time, but she taught me the value of listening and learning from my elders, and especially to appreciate older people. and listen to their life's journey. And I got to know several of the older people. One older gentleman told me about being a young soldier in World War I, which just fascinated me. And he gave me a couple of buttons off his World War I uniform. I still have them to this day.
Wow.
Oh yeah, and but take the time to listen to them, because they have a journey. Everybody has a journey in life, and too often we forget that. Whether it be a homeless person on the street, whether it be an elderly person in a home, whether it be a young person, everybody has a journey. They've come to where they are by going down a pathway, and it's so rich and valuable if we take the time and just listen. And I learned by listening to these folks talk, and I learned a great appreciation. I learned a whole lot of different things, a lot of different places. Another elderly lady who used to go to St. Maria Goretti Church, where I was going as a young kid. She was from Jamaica. She was a lovely, lovely lady. And she would tell stories about growing up in Jamaica, and I would listen to her. And as we'd walked home after church, my mom would walk along with her, and she would have been in her 70s at the time, but just a lovely, lovely lady to listen to. And always the rich stories and this amazing laugh. I can still hear her laughing, just this wonderful laugh. And at Christmas time, she always made rum balls, which Mom loved.
And were you allowed to enjoy the rum balls also?
No, and that was not allowed.
Yeah, it's so apparent to me that your childhood growing up in this community housing complex, it had such an impact on you. And like, I can just see your childhood shining through, and it must just have such an impact on the way that you've policed throughout your career. So tell me a little bit more about your journey. How did you actually then go about becoming a police officer?
Sure. So, growing up where I did, it wasn't all wonderful. There were times where there were things, there's an environment and things that make me upset today when I hear about it in terms of how people are living today. The building was great for the first little while. Around about the time I was getting to be 13, 14 years old, the elevators were perpetually broken. There was fecal matter in the hallways and in the staircases. Some small amounts of people seemed to not care anymore. They didn't see this as a common living environment. They just didn't care, and they did whatever they want to do. We started to see the issues with mental health and addictions. I remember coming home, and sometimes from like a Saturday mass, whatnot, or if I was out visiting relatives, getting dropped off and coming in the door between 10, 11 o'clock at night. And there's, a lady, and she's just completely gone through a window. She's flaked out on whatever drug she's taken, or she's laying by the elevators, stoned out of her mind. And these issues were prevalent. So these didn't just occur recently. These issues of poverty and mental health have been around for a long, long, long time. And I saw that as a young boy. And my mom explained to me that these people need help. They need to be cared for. There's got to be services for them. Meanwhile, we're stepping over the person to try to get in. We called it the community guardian, and they would come in and try to deal with them. And in those days, they did have programs in the building. There was a site manager. They had an office, so things could be referred to the site manager, and that would help out that way. But these issues are still here today, and now transposing myself to modern times, and I hear about buildings that are falling apart. I hear about broken sinks and broken toilets. I hear about the dirt and the disrepair of how people are living. I'm not going to condemn anybody or any entity. I just find that we all deserve a good standard of living. We all deserve to live in a clean environment. My mom believed in that and contributed to what she did, and I know many other people do it wherever they live today. I just hope that we can see that there's a value to treating people like humans, because the other side of that is a child that grows up in an environment that appears to not care for them, an environment that is dirty, an environment that is in disrepair, an environment that's got broken lights and damaged things. I think that reinforces a message to that child that you don't matter. And no child should ever have to feel like they don't matter. Because the long-term consequences of that are staggering for our society. And it begins with a proper environment in which to live, a proper environment to go to school, a proper environment where they have food and proper clothing. So those are the investments that need to be done today. And I feel very passionately about that, given where I came from and some of the things I saw as a child growing up as a young adult in housing until the age of 19.
So
Yeah.
I want to, I know we're kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and I want to come back to when you were 19 years old, but first, what do you see as your role in fixing all of that as a police officer? Because a lot of people think of police as, well, you go and you arrest the bad guys and quote unquote bad guys. And, but you're very passionate about these issues. What is your role as a staff superintendent, or even coming up through the ranks in when you see people, living in states of disrepair or not having, the same chance at life than say people who are not growing up in housing?
Well, the role of all of us is to be engaged in whatever capacity can be as a police officer, as a young officer. And I mentioned before, sometimes when you get bombarded with issues, when you're going to the same place all the time for the same issues, you become desensitized. You stop seeing the human journey, and you start seeing another radio call. And I found myself that at times, and had to step back and regroup and say, okay, hang on, what are we dealing with here? What's really at the cause? Yes, I'm here for the 10th time this week at this particular location for yet another issue, but they're people, and you've always got to keep that in mind. It's people going through hard times, whether it be economic hard times, whether they have mental health and addictions. There's things going on, and you don't understand somebody else's journey. So I always try to make sure that I could understand somebody else's journey. I am not perfect, and there are times that I just didn't pay attention to it. And I look back at those days and said, thankfully, I paid attention more often than not and learned other people's journey. I took the time to ask the questions. And as I became a supervisor and a senior officer, I would make sure that when we're talking about with people, I would always say, here's my journey. This is where I come from. I lived in housing from the age of 2 to the age of 19. When I walk a housing complex, everybody that I meet is a sir or a man until they can prove to me that they don't deserve to be called such. And there's many other people I've met in very wealthy neighborhoods that have proven them by their behavior and the way their attitudes are and how they treat others that don't deserve sir and ma'am. So when you walk through a place, treat people with respect. And that's what I demanded of the officers. Treat people with respect. You don't go into a place, or you don't go dealing with somebody homeless on the street and say, hey, you. How about just starting with good afternoon, sir?
Mm-hmm.
And then go from there, because you don't know that journey. I told the story of my uncle, who was a World War II vet, and had some trials over with the war service. A best friend was killed in battle. He had some mental health issues coming out of the war. He married. He had 2 children. Both of them died as infants. And that was the end of him. And he took to a life of alcoholism, and he never recovered. And you don't know, when you look at somebody else, you don't know their journey. You see what they've become, but you don't know how they got there. And so I've always tried to keep that in my mind as I grew in experience and grew in maturity, is to drive that home to myself and to other people. Try to understand somebody else's journey. Even when we're talking with our friends, when we're talking with our coworkers, yes, they're a member of the service. I don't know their journey. So listen to them. And you'll be much richer for it. And you may, in fact, be able to help them. So that's part of what we do. And then, of course, we had the neighborhood officer program, which when I first heard about 10 years ago, and was 54 division, we were asked to pilot the very first iteration of the neighborhood officer program. I thought this was amazing. And I remember one great example. Had a young officer, one of our early neighborhood officers in Flemington Park, and he came to me and he was all upset. He says, Inspector, I got to show you some photos I took here. And so what is it? He says, take a look at this. And I look at the photos, and it's a row of townhouses, and in front is all these broken toilets. And I said, oh, they're getting new plumbing fixtures. Yes, sir, they are. But these things have been out on the lawn for about 6 to 8 weeks now. Oh. And it's an eyesore. And that's my reaction, Tamara. That's how was that allowed to be the case? Because again, it's messaging to people that way you would never see that in a more affluent area. There's not going to be broken toilets and everything strewn all over the lawns for 6 or 8 weeks. You would never see that. Mm-hmm. But it was allowed for whatever reason. So we happen to be meeting with TCHC Security and with the manager for that particular area. And this just can't be allowed. This cannot be. You're sending a message to these kids. You're sending a message to those families. I'm so thankful that all the plumbing's being updated and repaired. That's wonderful. But as you do the thing, you're sending a message on the other side. We always have to be mindful, even when trying to do the good thing, just leaving it all strewn out there is an eyesore to the community. Little things like that. I mentioned another story, walked through another area. I happened to be with a counselor at the time, and we pointed out that there had been a shooting there several months ago. The bullet holes were still in the siding, right? The lights were still broken. We were walking through the complex, and I see all these cables, strewn in the trees, and then running down into a staircase going to the underground parking lot. The cables are just hanging. I said, how is this allowed? And I happened to be there with a senior member from Toronto Community Housing. We asked, how is this allowed? Who does service like this? Because they would never do it in my house and get away with it. Wouldn't do it in yours, but they did it here. Again, that reinforces a message. You don't matter, or you matter less. That should never be. Bullet holes in the siding. Oh, fix it. Because there's children grow up there and they have to believe that they matter. They're just as important as anybody else. So that's always been my passion. And wherever I am, whatever situation I'm in, that's where I feel my youth growing up and feel all my career, what I've seen, and always remind myself, you don't know somebody else's journey. Nobody should be made to feel they don't matter at any age. And it's little things. Maybe perhaps there's just a delay in getting services, but always be mindful of these things and the impact on people.
You described a lot of positive interactions with police officers growing up next to 41 Division, but in our previous conversation, you described one negative interaction. Can you tell me that story right now? Absolutely.
So I was 7 years old, and my mom had been working and would go off and would try to make ends meet by scrubbing homes and stuff like that, whatever she could do to get a little extra cash. And she bought me a bike, and it was a little orange bike, had the banana seat back in the day. I'm going to date myself and be very old here. Banana seat, the handlebars, and it was the most amazing bike there ever was. And I'm riding around the lot of the building, and it's there's a big long driveway, and then it comes out on a section of the sidewalk, and they ride down the sidewalk back to the driveway, and a police car pulled up. And I can still see him, the old police car. And he said, "Hey, you, come here." And I said, "Yes, sir." "Where'd you get that bike from?" I says, "My birthday. My mom bought me the bike." So nobody in that building can afford that bike. And I just said, "It's my birthday. My mom bought me the bike." And he grumbled a few other things, and then he drove off, and I went upstairs to tell my mom. So the policeman asked me about my bike. And my mom said, "What did he say?" And I told her. Well, she hit the roof and ran downstairs and ran over to the front desk at 41 Division to have a little conversation about the officer questioning me about where I got the bike from, and the attitude that nobody in that building could afford that bike. Right? Again, not understanding. My mom worked, but in those days, there was no equal pay for women. We didn't have pay equity. Women were treated poorly in the workplace. They were underpaid for the same job that men were doing. That's a fact. It's an inescapable fact. And my mom was one of those women where the men that she worked with were making far more. And I remember mom telling me a story when was talking to her in later years. She said, I went and asked for a raise when you were about 6 years old. And they told me that I couldn't make the same money as a man because he had a family to feed. And she says, "Well, I've got a son." And they said, "Well, maybe you need to find yourself a husband." Can you imagine that? That's 50 years ago. And that was an attitude. And so we've changed in society so much, and I'm so thankful for it. But again, I know these stories, and my mom lived those realities. And by learning, we talk about the realities of the past, and we can make a better future.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember how that made you feel when that officer said that to you, that nobody in your building can afford a bike like that?
You know what? I was upset, Because I thought I was in trouble. And I was upset because it only reinforced to me other comments that I heard at school talking about kids from broken homes, kids from that building. And, and I had that periodically, thankfully not constant, but periodically growing up, where sometimes teachers would make reference to, children growing up in broken, so-called broken homes, no father around. And it was this kind of like this automatic leap that if you grew up in a housing complex, if you don't have a father around, you're automatically some sort of that you're underprivileged. I didn't know I was underprivileged. My mom was amazing and took me places and invested in me, and did everything she could. Mind you, my mom wore the same winter coat from the photos I have of her from 1968 until I started working part-time when I was 16 years old and bought her a new winter coat for the first time.
Wow.
And I remember I took it and I looked at all the lining and it was so full of sewing marks where she had sewn the lining and resewed the lining over all those years. But she put me first and invested in me, but taught me a lot of great lessons as well. So, I didn't know what they were referring to. And I had great friends growing up and their moms worked. I remember one of my friends, his mom worked at Laura Seacourt. She was one of the most popular ladies around.
Of course, bringing chocolate home.
And little chubby little guys running around just couldn't wait to see her. And she'd hand out the little wee chocolate bars that she'd bring home from time to time. Yeah.
Okay, so first, what was that first part-time job you had when you were 16?
Well, my first part-time job, I was 12.
Okay.
And it was at a little variety store as a stock boy, and because I wanted money, and I used to go around in the garbage bins, and I would reach into the garbage bins to see if there's any pop bottles, because try to get money for treats. Because being a chubby little guy, we like the treats. So I would take a little shopping bag and I'd load up any pop bottles I could find and take it back and try to get a treat. And so I begged and pleaded with my mom to be able to go and work. And I got hired as a I guess, part-time stock boy at a little variety store just close to right beside 41 Division. And I worked there for, I don't know, maybe a month or so. And I was lifting these heavy things of pop and stuff and whatnot. And my mom just said, that's enough. You focus on school. I guess she figured that I wouldn't actually go do it. And I did.
Yeah.
So she said, no, that's enough. So then I left that and then I got hired at Lewis Craft.
Okay.
Lewis Craft stores, they would sell, in those days, they sold model cars and things like that, plus wool and 3D paper tolling and things. So I went in there and I had made little models of cars and stuff as a kid. So when I was being interviewed, they said, okay, would you be willing to take lessons on knitting and 3D paper toll and things? Because we got to sell these products too. I said, I'll take any lesson as long as it gets me hired. So okay. So I was the only guy that worked in the store. And I went and sat and I never learned to knit, but I learned about what different wools were and this wool was for this type of thing and the patterns were and how to answer questions about that. And then I did learn the 3D paper tolling thing, making those 3D layered paper images. So I got to teach classes on a Saturday. So yeah, we learned a lot.
Wow. Okay, so then jumping forward to getting into policing, do you think that growing up in community housing, having the interactions you did with police, both positive and negative, did that work to your benefit, do you think, in getting hired, or was that something you didn't really talk about?
It was a passion in me, and I was going to apply for policing no matter what. Certainly the positive interactions I had, the many positive interactions I had, and the reinforcement from my mom about the role of police in society to help people, that just strengthened me that was what I want to do. I was 18 years old. I was about 198 pounds. And in those days we had to do this run. So I dropped 50 pounds over 6 months, starved, and ran every single day. And so, I lost the weight and it was hard.
No kidding.
Bone skinny. And I went and I applied and I did the physical and I could run like a gazelle because I was just a rake. and did all the academic testing, everything. And it was around about 1st of June of 1985, I got a letter and from the Toronto Police Service. And I was so nervous. And I ran upstairs because I'd opened the mailbox in the building, ran upstairs and told my mom, I got this letter. And she said, well, let's open it and see. And she said, even if you didn't get it, I'll still be proud of you. And there's always another opportunities. Okay. So I opened the letter and it says, you're going to be hired as a cadet. Congratulations. You report on September 24th at the 365 Bloor Street East, and sign whomever it was on the letter. I've still got it someplace put away. And I was just excited. And so I hadn't even finished grade 13 yet. And I got this letter saying, here's your future ahead of you, kid. Wow. And my mom said, you worked very hard to be here. You've been very good. Stay out of trouble. And you can have a great career ahead of you. So
she must have been so proud of you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And it was great. And then I finished the last 2 weeks of school and people would say, well, they're doing this, doing that. And so what are you doing? So, well, I'm being hired by the Toronto Police in September. Really? I said, yeah. Now, in today's age, I would say, I wouldn't have probably applied at 18 years old. I would have gone off to college, university. But where I was at that time, I wanted to get the job and I wanted to move out of community housing. I wanted to take my mom out of community housing. And that just drove me hard to do that. And going off to college, university for 4 years wasn't going to achieve that for me. I went back as a police officer. I went back to college, I went back to university, completed diplomas and degrees. But at that time, my overarching mandate was to make things better. That was in my mind. I have to make it better.
So you said earlier in the conversation that you lived in that community housing building until you were 19. So you were still living there when you started policing. Tell me what that was like. Like, did you tell your colleagues that you were living there? Because that was a different time. We're going back quite a ways. And I imagine a lot of police officers, the way that they looked at community housing then was different than now. And I mean, I'm sure there's some police officers that look at it the same now, but far fewer. So just tell me what that was like.
So there was a lot of stigma, as I said, even at school, and I'm not going to many teachers. It was a different time. There's a different attitude. But even at school, that they found out where people made comments. Even when I was as a kid, for I'd say up until about 12 years old, I was so thankful. The building, a pool in the backyard, which was amazing. But to swim in the pool, because they didn't want a coming pool that live in the building and causing trouble, you had to have a little patch on your bathing suit. So they gave you this little patch. The patch was a stick figure of a person with a single chevron over top of it to indicate you lived in housing. Well, I didn't have 3 or 4 bathing suits. I had one. So when I went to McGregor Park pool, everybody knew I lived in housing. If we went to Q Beach, everybody knew I lived in housing, but knew what that symbol was. And so I felt that there was a stigma. Gosh, they got rid of it, but there was a stigma. There was a stigma about growing up there, how people were viewed about living in housing. And when I joined at 19, I joined in September, and I continued to live there until we moved out in January of 1986. So 4 months there. I didn't tell anybody. And I remember one night we were out with some cadets, and they said, because I didn't have a car. They said, well, we'll drop you off. Where do you live? And I, well, just drop me at this intersection. Well, we'll drop you. Where do you live? Well, just right here, just drop me in the intersection. Oh no, we'll take you right to your house. So I don't live in a house. I live in an apartment building. Okay, where's that? Well, right, so I had them drop me off in the front driveway, and I was just mortified that somebody should know that I lived in housing, because at that age, I was concerned about how I would be seen. And it was only by growing as a police officer, I met so many police officers that grew up in housing. They grew up I can name all the different housing places that they grew up in. And some of them didn't go that way, others did. They said, yeah, I didn't mention anything for years. But when you start to open up and talk to people, you realize so many others have come through the same journey. And I know today there's so many have come through the same journey.
And okay, so then tell me, when you started in policing, you were posted, where were you posted, and where did you go from there?
So I was, as a kid, I was an extreme introvert. I mean, like off the charts, shy, wouldn't even talk to my aunts and uncles, for gosh sake. Like, I was just so shy and struggled to get over that shyness. but under pressure, I could stand up and deliver a presentation in school and do those things, but it was just eating me inside out. And I joined the police service in September of '85, and they post me in public affairs,
No
the modern day
way.
public communication, to do tours at the museum at 590 Jarvis for all these people coming in from off the street, classes coming in. And my heart, I remember just thinking, I'm going to fail. I'm going to, because I don't know how I'm going to do this tour. This is an impossibility. And again, my mom just said, go there, you can do this. You know, you can do this. Just pretend you're doing the presentation at school. And I went there, and everybody was so supportive, from the Staff Superintendent, Don Banks, the inspectors were supportive. Everybody was so supportive. And I just learned. In fact, one of the first cadets I met is now the acting city manager, Tracy Cook.
Oh, wow.
And in Toronto. Oh yeah. And
yeah, because she was a police officer. She was
that's right.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so she was at public affairs when I arrived, and there was another young cadet there at the same time. The two of us arrived at the same time, and Tracy was like the senior cadet.
Yeah.
And so she taught us a little bit for the little couple of months that we overlapped that was there. And we laugh about that every so often when we get together at a function, or I'm at a meeting at the city, we see each other and laugh about 1985.
Yeah.
So she taught me some things. And again, you learn. It's always continuous learning. And I got used to it. So that was my first posting as a brand new cadet in the Toronto Police Service.
So where did you go from there? Like what different postings have you had throughout your career?
Oh, as a young cadet, and this is why the cadet program was so amazing, and so many of my generation came through the cadet program. I got to work at public affairs. I got to work at traffic services. I worked at the Summons Bureau, and I worked at 43 Division. Amazing experiences. Riding along with the police officer, attending calls for service. I got to see all sorts of things. Was involved in arrests, although we had no powers of arrest, but I supported the officer. Saw some tragic things. Saw some people that had committed suicide. Learned about that. Learned about the paperwork. Learned to use the radio. As a young officer at traffic services, like so many of our other members of the day, you just happen to be out there. You're writing tickets and parking tickets, and stuff's happening around you. And you're in the police uniform. Nobody's paying attention to the little flasher underneath that says cadet. They see a cop standing there. They don't see that I don't have a red stripe, and they yell for help. You go and you help, and got involved in several arrests, and got involved in a bunch of other things that really opened my mind to policing. Got a person in a car. I remember a car accident, and the car caught fire, and the person was burnt. Like all these different exposures, and you're 20 years old.
Gosh, so young.
This richness of experience.
So what impact did that have on you? Like, how did you cope with that stuff? Because I've had so many conversations with people about the mental health aspect of policing, but like 20 is so young, even for a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, those traumatic exposures can really take their toll. How did you navigate those? How did you take care of yourself through those years?
I think it's by my growing up. That wasn't the first time I had seen terrible things. I had seen things previously growing up. I had seen, as I said, growing up, people with mental health addictions. I had seen somebody jump from the building that I grew up in and laying on the ground. I had seen people laid out in the hallways with, all cut up and stuff like that. It wasn't my first time seeing that. Today, we'd call that community trauma and a contributor to adverse childhood experiences. But I had a strong support, and I had my mom talk to me and explain things and be there to support. So maybe, just maybe, that benefited me. But I also had a strong network of senior constables around me, older constables. As a young constable, when I first came out, there was maybe 2-3 of us that had less than about 15 years on the service. And so I had this tremendous depth of experience to say, hey, kid, come here, right? And talk to you about things. Today, we're very, very junior. We've got divisions that are 45, 50, 60% are less than second class, meaning they get 2 to 3 years on.
Wow.
We've lost so much of that experience. Those hey kid moments aren't there that I benefit from. Many of my generation benefit from all these very senior people that have been there, done that, seen things, and could guide you, right? Call you after at home and say, how you doing, kid?
So what impact do you think that has now on the police service? Not having as many people with as much experience, but of course it's a different type of person that's becoming a police officer now too.
Well, we have a lot more programs. We have a lot more attention to mental health and well-being. We have a lot more emphasis. You can openly talk about things, and you don't feel that you can't say, "Hey, Tamara, how are you feeling today? You look upset about something. Can I help you?" Right? We can have those conversations today. We didn't have those conversations in 1985. Maybe behind the scenes, maybe somebody might phone you. Maybe somebody's in the scout car say, "Hey, kid, you doing okay?" But there was not a lot of programs, but we've learned, we've come so far, and we have so many different programs and support programs, and the police association, the senior officers organization, all just completely support the command team for several years now, just openly supporting and embracing mental health and wellness. Are we perfect? Nobody is. Can we learn more and grow better, grow more and do better? Absolutely. But we're a heck of a lot better than we ever were in my career.
You mentioned something when we spoke on the phone a couple of weeks ago about, when you were a uniformed patrol officer, you might get 1 or 2 shooting calls like a year that you would respond to. And talk to me about how different that is now, and in terms of like the impact and what officers that can experience now, because I found that it was really eye-opening for me, even though I know the number of shootings in Toronto. I didn't consider, and I don't think a lot of members of the public would consider, what that means for actually the officers on the ground who are responding to these calls.
Sure. As a young constable hitting the ground in 1988, you would hear a sound of gunshots call, and then you would follow by duty inspectors monitoring. The duty inspector, the highest ranking senior officer on duty in the evening hours, is now listening to a sound of gunshots call because they're so infrequent. Today, if we were to monitor every sound of gunshots call, I don't think we'd ever stop monitoring.
There's like multiple sound of gunshots a day,
right,
around the city,
across the city.
Yeah,
and many are real, and some aren't, right? But all too sadly, more and more of them are real, and more of them are resulting in people that have been injured or killed. But as a young officer, that was the experience, and over the years, they became more frequent. Next thing you know, by the early 90s, we're going to see the gunplay and the shootings, and people are being shot here and there. But then it just continued to grow. Today, and I'll draw back my time as a senior officer in a unit in division. You get the morning report and you hear about the event. Staff sergeant briefs and says, "Yep, the such and such officer was first on scene. There was a sound of gunshots called, and the next one came in. So the person's been shot. They arrived on scene. The person was bleeding out. He or she reached into the wound and grabbed hold of the artery and did compression on the artery, tied a tourniquet on it." And this is going on. We've had so many officers being awarded with St. John's Ambulance life-saving awards for these stories, and it's unbelievable. And then you see the same officer at time and going, "Did this person do this like 3 years ago?" Oh yeah. In some divisions, we would see shootings, back-to-back shootings on different nights, and I would call up there and say, "Is that the same platoon?" "Yeah, it's the same officers now that have been, third or fourth shooting in the week that they're working, that have been exposed to this, that are seeing somebody on the ground with a bullet wound in the head or in the chest, or at different ages, and this is a human trauma that's unfolding in front that they're exposed to, and you might expect to see that in some battle zone, in some faraway place, but this is Toronto, and in some areas, sometimes we could have the same officers having repeated exposure to these types of things. All the more important about mental health, wellness of our members, right? Thankfully, compared to any other large city around the world, we are lower, but every shooting strikes the fear in the community. And we always got to bear that in mind. And our members that are there, whether they be special constables guarding the scene thereafter, whether they be our constables or supervisors that are arriving on scene and providing immediate life-saving support until paramedics are arriving on scene and assisting thereafter, that's all exposure to trauma. Trauma that many of them, certainly in this generation, may not have seen before or might not have anticipated they're going to see. And that's the realities. Thankfully, that's still a small part of their job, but it's a very significant and impactful part of their job.
So you've talked.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, continue.
Well, I was going to say that's just the gunfire. The other side of the job that are traumas that we don't think about are those things where we see the sexual assault victims, the children that have been abused, the domestic violence, and with the children being assaulted, the spouses being assaulted, and all these things will play on you over time because you're seeing people who are suffering, seeing people who are being victimized. And you know your role, you know what you need to do to try to help and support and make referrals and everything else. Plus the strain of seeing people that are suffering mental health and addictions and their trials and tribulations and what they're going through. Mm-hmm. And it all impacts you at different ways and different scales.
A lot of officers, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of the officers that I've spoken with as part of this campaign have pointed to like a mutual distrust between what that they've experienced and seen between police officers and members of the community, and how they've worked at getting through that, and talking about, starting when you see so many like negative things, starting to see everything as negative. So what you're describing, potentially the same police officers responding to one shooting one night and then another shooting the next night and then maybe another one the next week and all this stuff. Like I know you mentioned earlier on how you can never lose sight of the fact that you're dealing with human beings and everybody has a story. But how do you, for these officers on the street right now, how do you not become jaded or just see everything as negative? Like, are the mental health supports, is that enough? Or do we just, as a senior officer, are you just constantly talking to the more junior officers about, remember, these are human beings and everybody has a story? Like, because the police officers are human beings too. Like, I'm trying to show the public why sometimes relationships can be like this, because we don't think about the whole picture all the time, the traumatic exposures and all that stuff. So how do you keep those relationships positive and professional?
Every officer has to come to it from who they are in their own background. And it starts off, and I'm no mental health expert, but I believe it starts off by being in a sound place yourself and knowing that your family's okay, that you're well in your own life, in your own world. And I think that's so important, because if there's things going on in your world, in your personal life, these then become added stressors to that. And it can really impact you. So it starts off with trying to be in a good place yourself. And that's very challenging at times, because life can take us on twists and turns, from marital strife, financial problems, maybe an ill child, or now the parental squeeze, like so many of our generation caring for an elderly parent who has a number of health issues. So there's all these things that can compress your time, compress your spirit. And that's why it's very important. And we talk to certainly when I've talked to recruits that are joining us, is to let them know that the supports isn't just about what you're going to see as a police officer. It's about how you're doing as a person, how you're doing with your family, and that don't be afraid to reach out for help. It's not just, oh, I went to this call and it's upsetting me. There may be things in your own world that are causing you strain, and you need to come forward and you need to seek out that help. And the programs are there, and our Toronto Police Association supports these programs, because that's key. Because if you be in a good spot personally, that may give you the little bit of strength you need to help deal with this other part of the job. And then when we're dealing these things that you see as part of the job, again, those supports are there. And we always have to advocate for them. We always have to push for critical incident responders. There's various programs and supports that are available. And we have to make sure our people are aware of it and they avail themselves of it. We have defusing sessions, we have debriefing sessions. All of these are critical components to making sure the officers are well. When I'm talking with senior officers, newly promoted senior officers, we always say, okay, what do you need to monitor now? The officer's been involved in something, what are we going to monitor? We're going to monitor for any sort of behavioral change, whether they're, all of a sudden they become the grumpy person in the guard room, or you start to see differences in how they're behaving and interacting with others. Always monitor and from any change, because we're looking for the first indicator that something is just not right. And then have that conversation with somebody. How are you feeling? That's key. And maybe they don't want to talk to you as a senior officer. Great. Do they have friends in the service? Or do they have anybody else? The association steward, a peer referral, whatever it takes to let that person know that they matter. We do care, and the supports are available to help them out.
that has been I mean, that's obviously a huge change in policing now compared to when you came on as a cadet and then a constable. What other sort of changes have you seen in the police service during your time there?
Oh my goodness. You know, you name it, the social change, we've seen it. Whatever it is, we've gone through, we've grown so much in terms of our diversity and our inclusivity. And it's thankful to groundbreakers who led the way. And I can't even imagine what it would be like in the 1960s for the women that joined the service. You know, there was a documentary made in 1966 or so, and it was called the Powder Puff Patrol. And it's still available on YouTube. And it talked about, you know, women in policing and how they can bring their motherly instincts into working in the Women's Bureau and stuff like this. And you're looking at it today and going, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I'm watching. But in its day, in its context, you know, women were breaking into policing and they were being investigators, and they were showing them being investigators, and they're doing amazing things. And those ladies, they broke new grounds and they set the pathway for so many others. But what was the name of the documentary? The Powder Puff Patrol. Again, in that era, we've come so far. So it's just an amazing journey, even in my time. Just how we recognize and embrace our diversity, whether it be racial diversity, LGBTQ2S+ diversity, just women in the workplace. Are we perfect? Show me a place that is. Or do we need to continue to grow? Absolutely. Right? There's always more room for growth. There's always room for improvement. We're so much better than where we were when I joined in '85. And in '85, we were so much better than we were in 1966. It's an evolution.
I want you to share the story, because I think this is such a beautiful full circle moment about the work that's going on at 41 Division now, and your comments about the requirements for the fence there. Tell me about what's going on at 41 Division.
Sure. So I'll just go back a little bit in time. 41 Division is on the northeast corner of Birchmount and Eglinton. And as my mom and I would go shopping with the bundle buggy going up to Loblaws, Kennedy and Eglinton, there was this little wee dirt path. So instead of walking down Birchmount to the corner of Eglinton and hooking the sharp 90-degree turn and walking along Eglinton East, everybody took the pathway across the front lawn of 41 Division. And it was a dirt path for many, many years. Eventually, I just figured out, well, everybody walks across my grass. Why not just pave it? So they did put a little asphalt pathway there. And so how many times have we go down that pathway? And that's part of the connection. And I'll explain the story in a second. So fast forward to 2017. I've just finished a year, 14 months with the Transformational Task Force, and I'm told you're being reassigned as a unit commander at 41 Division. And I said, you have no idea what that means. I went from the little boy who stood at the fence, dreaming of being a police officer and telling them at 6 and 7 years old, I'm gonna be a policeman one day, to arriving as the unit commander. And my office, when I went and sat in my office, I opened the blinds and looked out, and there's the pathway. And there was a lady with her little boy walking along the pathway. And my mom had been long deceased by then. She passed in 2009. And I just paused and said, thank you, Mom. Thank you for the support. You got me here. You got me here. Without her, no way. And so then fast forward, a new 41 Division is being built. And it's so exciting. And I've been so fortunate that we've been involved in this with facilities. And Tom Levesque has been leading facilities and listening to ideas and stuff, and been at several meetings. And at the launch of the new 41, that was just occurred, everybody's there and they're celebrating the launch, and we're chatting about the fence and how, you know, in this day and age we have to have some security and everything else, and you know, make sure things are protected and whatnot. And I said, please tell me we're not putting up a wooden fence, because I can't see anything other than a proper open chain link fence. I can't see changing that, because if you put up a wooden fence, you put up any sort of obstruction, That's, you're holding up your hand to the face of some other kid who's going to stand where I stood and say, I want to be a policeman one day. We cannot do that. Please leave the fence open. So he assured me there'll be a chain link fence, so the kids will be able to see and whatnot. We're not going to put up a wall to the community. And I think that's so important. I understand the need for security. I'm all over that. But I just feel, I just can't imagine some other kid playing grass right there, strolling over to see the police officer and wanting to say hi, but you can't because there's a 8-foot wooden fence.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my call. I'm just passionate about that. I just feel we need to be open and connect. And that was my journey. And I'm hoping and praying some other kid is standing there one day and some police officer comes out and says, hey, little boy, little girl, how you doing? You know, stay in school, be good. And maybe that person will become a police officer one day. Who knows?
I imagine you've had so many conversations with little kids like that over the years.
You know, it's really good to meet kids and get out. I've met so many kids and always just try to be positive throughout my entire career, and just to let them know that, you know, they can be anything you want to be, and just, you know, get down. Just always kneel right down to their level, take my hat off, kneel down and get to their level and chat with them. And I think it's really important, and let them know that they matter.
Mm-hmm. You've talked a lot about, you know, what you want officers to see in the community, you know, the idea of everybody having a journey. Is there anything else, Staff Superintendent, that you would like the community to know about police, to know about you, to know about police officers in general, to know about policing?
We all have a journey too. We've all seen things. We all come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different races, different religions. We have a great diversity in this organization. We've got our own journeys, we've got our stories, and we've got a journey as a police officer on top of the journey as a normal resident of a community. And that journey as a police officer exposes us to a lot of things. We see a lot of the ills that one human being can do to another. We see the mayhem, we see the destruction of human life, but we also see from time to time how other human beings in the community rise to the occasion, how they support. We see the relationships. We see how communities want to have a really good, positive relationship with the police. So we see all sides of it. And if the community can understand that there's two people in an interaction, there's always two people in an interaction, and they have their journeys. And somewhere along the line, their journeys have brought them together at that moment in time, at that location. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes there's behaviors at play by the community. But in any situation, there's always two incredible journeys that brought these people together. And while we try to understand the one side, we also have to understand the police officer and their journey and how they got there, and to see them as a human being, see them as a father, as a sister, as a mother, as a daughter, as a coach, as a mentor, because so many of our people play multiple roles. Nobody is a police officer. They work for the Toronto Police Service, but they are a son or a daughter. They are a relative. They are a sibling. They are a friend, right? They play so many different roles in society. Some of them would be former school teachers, former iron workers, former paramedics, whatever. They might be the swim coach down the street. They could be volunteering at the community center next weekend. They are serving Meals on Wheels. They're doing all these different things that you will never hear about, because many don't tell that story unless it's directly related to their actions of police officer, right, where it becomes more of a public thing. But their personal life, they're off doing so many good things that you don't hear about. And they have pressures, and they have elderly that are going through significant times right now, and that's squeezing them for their efforts. They maybe have a sick child, and they're caring for that sick child while they come to work. So we all have journeys. And as I said, now we're in a situation where two people coming together in an interaction. We hope that it can be resolved, always be resolved in a safe way. Sometimes force has to be used. But there's a journey there. There's a story to be told. Are we always perfect? No. Do we always get it right? No. Do we strive to do better? Yeah. Do we have accountabilities? Absolutely. But we also want our people to really work with communities, and it's is to develop a sense of understanding of each other, to develop a mutual respect, and to understand and feel. We call it, in one of our core values is connect with compassion. Yes, and I call it my own way of just understand somebody else, understand where their world is. I remember there was a shooting a couple of years ago in the northwest end of the city, and a mom standing up front of the building, and a number of gunshots been fired, and one of the bullets went through their daughter's bedroom. Her little girl is 9 or 10, and she's being interviewed by the news, and she's crying. She's just sobbing. She said, my little girl's yelling, crying and begging me, mommy, please, let's move away from here, mommy, please. And she says, I don't have any money. Where am I going to go? How to protect my baby? And I saw that and connect with that. You feel that pain. And you have to feel somebody else's emotional journey and understand that. It's okay. What can we do? Who can we partner with? And we have so many, the city's got, so many different agencies and entities and that we can work with. And we got our neighborhood officers. And it's just try to see what is it we can tangibly do to try to help. Not just that lady, because she's on the face of the news, but all the other people that are in these buildings or in these situations, no matter what it is, no matter where it is.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to help? Because that full circle is why most of us, I believe in my heart, join the police service, is to say, what can I do to help you?
Mm-hmm. Staff Superintendent Barkley, it has been such a pleasure. I'm going to end it here because I know that you've probably got another meeting coming up any minute now. But sincere thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, the conversation we had before, and I hope members of the community will get a lot from it. So thank you for your time and for your comments.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Take care.